What if I told you that the country making headlines tonight was already written about 3,000 years ago? Not as a prediction, not as a guess, but by name, by location, by destiny. Iran, the land we see burning across every news channel, the land of missiles, of nuclear deals, of generals and ayatollahs, the land everyone is watching, and almost nobody understands. Long before it was called Iran, the Bible called it something else, Persia, and the prophets, men who lived in caves, in palaces, in exile, wrote about this nation with a precision that should make every honest person stop and think. They described its rise, they described its fall, they described a king who had set God's people free, and then they described what happens at the end. And here's what's strange, what's deeply, uncomfortably strange. The things written about Persia thousands of years ago are happening right now, in real time, on your phone, in your feed. Most people scroll past it. They see another war, another threat, another headline. They don't connect the dots. They don't know the dots even exist. But you're still here, which means something in you already suspects what I'm about to show you. So, before you click away, give me the next few minutes. Because what the Bible says about Iran isn't ancient history. It's a mirror. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with something most people don't know. The word Iran doesn't appear in the Bible, not once. You can search every translation, every version, every footnote, and you won't find it. But that doesn't mean the land isn't there. It just means it had another name, an older name, a name that carried weight across the ancient world for over 1,000 years. Persia. When you open the Old Testament and read about Persia, you're reading about the same soil, the same mountains, the same people who live there today. The borders have shifted, the language has evolved, the religion has changed completely, but the land is the same, the bloodline is the same, the strategic position on the map is the same. And the Bible has a lot to say about it, more than most preachers ever mention from a pulpit, more than most Christians have ever read carefully. Persia shows up in the book of Ezra. It shows up in Nehemiah. It dominates the book of Esther. It appears in the visions of Daniel. It's named directly in Ezekiel. And it echoes through the prophecies that have never yet been fulfilled. That's the part I want you to sit with for a moment, because we tend to think of biblical nations as ghosts. Babylon is gone. Assyria is gone. The Hittites are gone. But Persia is still standing. Different name, different rulers, different flag, but the nation itself has not vanished. It has simply changed clothes, and that survival is not an accident. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The first time Persia really steps onto the stage of Scripture, it doesn't come in as a villain. It comes in as a deliverer. Think about that for a second. The Jewish people had been carried off into exile. Their temple was destroyed. Their city, Jerusalem, was rubble. They were captives in a foreign land, sitting by foreign rivers, weeping for a home they could no longer see. Babylon had crushed them, and from the human point of view, it looked like the story was over. But then, a man rose up in the east. His name was Cyrus, Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, a leader so unusual that the Bible calls him something almost no other foreign king ever gets called. It calls him God's anointed, his shepherd, his chosen instrument. And this is not a small detail. The word anointed in Hebrew is the word from which we get Messiah. It's the word reserved for kings of Israel, for priests, for the coming deliverer. And yet, here it is, applied to a pagan Persian emperor. Why? Because Cyrus did something nobody expected. He conquered Babylon. He walked into the city that had crushed Israel, and then, instead of enslaving the Jewish people further, he released them. He gave them permission to return home. He even funded the rebuilding of their temple. It was such a strange, unprecedented act that historians outside the Bible recorded it too. There's a clay cylinder discovered in the ruins of ancient Babylon that confirms the basic story. Cyrus let the captives go, And here is the part that should stop you cold. The prophet Isaiah named Cyrus by name. About 150 years before Cyrus was born. 150 years. Try to picture what that means. Imagine someone writing your name today, describing what you would do, what country you would lead, what people you would free, and then dying, long before your great-grandparents were even alive. That's the level of precision we're talking about. This is the first thing the Bible wants you to understand about Iran. Before it was a threat, it was a tool. Before it was feared, it was used. Before the modern headlines, there was a moment when the God of Israel reached into the heart of Persia and moved a king to do exactly what he had written down centuries earlier. And if he did that once, the question that should haunt every honest reader is simple. What else is written? And how close are we to seeing it happen again? So Cyrus opens the door, the captives walk out, and what happens next is one of the most overlooked moments in the entire Bible, because freedom is one thing, rebuilding is another. When the Jewish people came home, they didn't come back to a city. They came back to ashes. The walls of Jerusalem were broken. The gates were burned. The temple, the heart of their entire identity, was a pile of stones, overgrown with weeds. Whole generations had been born in Babylon. They had never seen the land of their fathers. They'd only heard about it in songs and whispers. And now they were standing in the middle of it, holding shovels, looking at ruins, wondering where to even begin. This is where Persia steps back into the story, not as a deliverer this time, as a sponsor. There's a book in the Bible that almost nobody reads. It's called Ezra. And if you sit down and actually read it, you will see something that should change the way you think about how God works in history. Because the rebuilding of Jerusalem was not funded by Israel, it was funded by Persia. The Persian kings, first Cyrus, then Darius, then Artaxerxes, kept signing decrees, kept releasing money, kept sending supplies, kept protecting the workers. The temple of the God of Israel was rebuilt with Persian gold, Persian timber, Persian permission, and Persian armed escort. Stop and let that sit for a second. The same land that today calls for the destruction of Israel once paid for Israel's restoration. That is not a small detail. That is a thread the Bible deliberately weaves into the story so that you cannot miss it later. Persia and Israel are not strangers. They have a history, a deep, complicated, intertwined history that goes back further than most modern conflicts ever do. Then comes Nehemiah, another book most people skip. Nehemiah was a Jewish man working inside the palace of the Persian king. He was the cupbearer. That sounds small, but it wasn't. The cupbearer was one of the most trusted people in the entire empire. He stood close to the throne. He tasted the king's wine. He had the king's ear, and one day, news reaches him that Jerusalem is still in ruins. Even with the temple rebuilt, the city itself has no walls, no defense, no dignity. And Nehemiah breaks. He weeps. He fasts. He prays. The Persian king sees his face and asks what's wrong. And here is the moment. A Jewish servant in a foreign court asks the most powerful man in the world for permission to go home and rebuild a city in a faraway province. And the king says yes. He gives him letters, he gives him timber, he gives him soldiers. This is the Persian Empire we're talking about, the same empire whose modern descendant burns Israeli flags in the streets. What changed? And that's the question I want you to hold in your hands for a moment. Because the Bible is not just telling you ancient history, it's showing you a pattern. It's showing you that nations are not fixed. Nations rise, nations fall, nations turn, and the same land that was once an instrument of restoration can become, generations later, an instrument of opposition. But here's what's deeper, and this is the part you have to feel to understand. The God of the Bible is not surprised by any of it. He raised up Cyrus. He moved Darius, he softened Artaxerxes, he placed Nehemiah in that palace, he arranged every piece on the board, and he did it knowing exactly what would come next, knowing the empire would rise, knowing it would fall, knowing it would be reborn under another name, knowing it would one day stand on the opposite side of the prophecy. There's something sobering about that, because if God could use Persia to bless Israel 3,000 years ago, he can use any nation, any leader, any moment for purposes that no human being can predict. And that brings us to a woman, a Jewish girl in a Persian palace, a girl whose story almost ended in genocide. Her name was Esther, and what happened to her, what almost happened to her people, is one of the most quietly terrifying chapters in the entire Bible. Because for the first time, inside this same Persian empire that had once protected the Jews, a plan was made to wipe them off the face of the earth. And as you'll see in a moment, that pattern has not gone away. Her name was Hadassah, but the world would come to know her as Esther. She was an orphan, raised by her older cousin, a quiet man named Mordecai. She had no royal blood, no political connections, no dowry, no inheritance, no power of any kind. She was just a Jewish girl in a foreign empire, trying to live a quiet life in the shadows of one of the largest cities on earth. And then, one day, the empire came knocking. The Persian king, at the time, was a man named Ahasuerus. Some historians believe this was Xerxes I, the same Xerxes who tried to invade Greece, the same Xerxes whose armies are remembered in marble carvings and ancient stone. He was a man of enormous appetite, wealth, wine, women, power, and he needed a new queen. So his servants combed the empire, taking the most beautiful young women from every province, bringing them into the palace, preparing them for one single night with the king. Esther was one of them. She didn't volunteer. She didn't dream of it. She was simply taken, the way countless girls in the ancient world were taken, without a voice, without a choice. But Mordecai told her one thing before she went. He said, "Don't tell anyone you're Jewish. Hide it." That instruction is the entire weight of the story, because Mordecai already understood something most of us still don't understand. Being Jewish in a foreign empire was not safe. It was never safe. It has almost never been safe in any century of human history, and Persia, for all its splendor, was no different. So Esther goes in, and out of every woman in the kingdom, the king chooses her. She becomes queen. She wears the crown. She walks the marble halls, and nobody knows who she really is. That's when the second character steps in, a man named Haman. Haman was the king's right hand, promoted above all the other officials, a man whose ambition was matched only by his hatred, and his hatred had a name: the Jews. Mordecai refused to bow to him, not out of rudeness, out of conviction, and that one refusal was enough. Haman didn't just want to kill Mordecai. He wanted to kill every Jewish person in every province of the empire, men, women, children, babies, on a single day, in a single coordinated act of extermination. He went to the king. He told him there was a certain people scattered throughout the kingdom whose laws were different, whose customs were strange, and who could not be trusted. He didn't even name them. He didn't have to. He bought the king's permission with silver. The decree was written. The seal was pressed. The order went out by horseback to every corner of Persia. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew in the empire was to be killed. Now, stop and feel that for a moment, because this is not a story you tell to children with cartoon drawings. This is a story of a real plan in a real empire on a real piece of land, the same piece of land that exists today, to erase an entire people from the face of the earth. And the only thing standing between that decree and that genocide was a young woman who had been told to hide who she was. What Esther did next is one of the bravest moments in the entire Bible. She approached the king without being summoned, knowing the law said anyone who did that could be executed on the spot. She fasted, she prayed, she prepared, and she said the words that have echoed through 3,000 years. If I perish, I perish. She revealed her identity. She exposed Haman. The plan unraveled. The decree was reversed. The Jewish people defended themselves, and the man who had built a gallows to hang Mordecai was hanged on it himself. The book of Esther ends in celebration, a feast called Purim, a holiday still observed today, every single year, by Jewish people all over the world, including in modern Iran, where small Jewish community still lives quietly and under enormous pressure. But here's the thing that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The pattern in the book of Esther, a Persian official, fueled by religious hatred, attempting to wipe out the Jewish people in a coordinated act of annihilation, is the exact pattern that modern Iranian leaders have openly declared in speeches, on television, in official documents. They have said in plain language that Israel should not exist, that it must be erased from the map. 3,000 years later, the same land, the same target, the same spirit. That is not coincidence. That is something else entirely. And to understand what that something else really is, we have to open the book of Daniel. Daniel was a young man when Babylon took him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a criminal. He was a teenager from Jerusalem, taken in chains to a foreign palace, trained in a foreign language, surrounded by foreign gods, and asked to forget who he was. He refused. What makes Daniel different from almost every other figure in the Old Testament is the position he held. He served at the highest level of two different world empires. First Babylon, then Persia. He stood in front of kings. He interpreted their dreams. He survived the lion's den. And in the quiet hours when the palace went to sleep, God gave him visions that mapped out the next 2,500 years of human history. I want you to sit with that, because most people, when they hear the word prophecy, they think of vague predictions and lucky guesses. Daniel is not that. Daniel is the part of the Bible that makes skeptics nervous. It is so specific, so detailed, so accurate, that many scholars have spent their entire careers trying to argue it must have been written after the events happened. Because if it wasn't, then something supernatural is going on. And it wasn't. In one of Daniel's visions, he sees a ram with two horns. One horn is taller than the other, and the taller one came up last. The ram charges west and north and south, and nothing can stand against it. Daniel doesn't have to guess what this means. An angel comes to him and explains it directly. The ram is the kingdom of Media and Persia, two horns, two peoples joined into one empire, exactly the way the Persian Empire formed. The taller horn that came up last, that's Persia, which rose to dominate the Medes. The directions of the charge, west, north, and south, exactly the directions in which the Persian Empire expanded. Daniel wrote this down before Persia even existed as a world power. Let that sink in. He described the rise of the empire, the structure of the empire, and the direction of its conquests before any of it had happened. Then the vision keeps going. A goat appears from the west. It moves so fast it doesn't even touch the ground. It has a single great horn between its eyes, and it attacks the ram with absolute fury. It breaks the ram's two horns, it tramples it, it destroys it, the angel explains. The goat is Greece, the great horn is its first king. History knows that king by another name, Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian who, 2 centuries after Daniel wrote, swept out of the west with an army that moved with terrifying speed, defeated the Persians in a series of stunning battles, and ended the empire that had once stretched from India to Egypt. Then, the vision says something even more specific. At the height of his power, the great horn would be broken, and in its place, 4 smaller horns would rise. Alexander died at 32 years old. At the peak of his power, with no clear heir, his empire was divided among 4 of his generals. 4 horns, 4 kingdoms, just as Daniel said, centuries before it happened. This is not poetry. This is not symbolism stretched to fit the facts. This is a written record, preserved in copies that predate the events, describing the rise and fall of the Persian Empire and the rise and fall of the Greek Empire, with a precision that should stop any honest person in their tracks. But here's the question that matters. If Daniel saw all of that, and all of that came true, then what about the parts of his visions that haven't happened yet? Because there are parts that haven't. Daniel saw kingdoms still to come. He saw a final ruler still to rise. He saw a moment of crisis at the end of time involving the same region, the same nations, the same land that has been at the center of the story from the beginning. And he saw a deliverance that has not yet arrived. The Persia of Daniel's vision is no longer Persia. It is Iran. But the land is the same. The strategic position is the same. The stubborn refusal to bow to outside power is the same. The capacity to influence the entire region is the same. And here's what I want you to feel. The Bible is not playing games with us. It doesn't drop a country into a prophecy and then forget about it. Persia is named by name in prophecies about the end, not Babylon. Babylon is gone, not Assyria. Assyria is gone, but Persia is named. Iran is named. The land that exists right now, with the borders we see on maps right now, is named in the unfulfilled prophecies of the Bible. And the prophet who saw the most about what happens at the end was a man named Ezekiel. What he saw is one of the most controversial and most discussed passages in all of Scripture. And once you understand what he wrote, you will not be able to watch the news the same way again. Before we get to Ezekiel, we need to understand something that almost no one talks about. How does an empire die? Because Persia, as Daniel saw it, did fall. The goat from the west came. Alexander broke the ram. The empire that had ruled the known world for 2 centuries collapsed in less than a decade. And then, silence. For a long time, the land that had been Persia faded into the background of the bigger story. The Greeks came, then the Romans, then the Parthians, then dynasty after dynasty. The land was still there, the people were still there, but the spotlight moved. And this is where the story gets strange, because most ancient nations, when they fall, they don't come back. Egypt fell and became a shadow of itself. Babylon fell and became a ruin in the sand. Assyria disappeared so completely that for centuries people argued whether it had ever really existed. But Persia didn't disappear. The land kept producing dynasties. The Sassanids, the Safavids, the Qajars, the Pahlavis. Empire after empire rising from the same soil, different rulers, different religions, different capitals, but the same stubborn ancient core, the same mountains, the same plateaus, the same fierce sense of identity. And then, in 1935, something quiet happened that almost nobody outside the region noticed. The country changed its name. Persia became Iran. The word Iran comes from an old root that means land of the Aryans. It was a name the people had used for themselves for a very long time. The change was officially announced to the rest of the world. Maps were redrawn, diplomatic letters were updated, and just like that, the name that had appeared in the Bible for thousands of years was replaced in the modern conversation with a name that does not appear in any English translation of Scripture. Think about how convenient that is. A whole generation of Bible readers grew up never hearing the word Iran in their church. They heard about Persia in dusty old stories. They heard about Iran on the news, and nobody connected them. Nobody told them. Nobody pointed at the map and said, that's the same place. That's the country your Bible was talking about. But the name change is only half of the story. Because in 1979, something else happened. Something far bigger than a name change. Something that I believe history will look back on as one of the most spiritually significant moments of the 20th century. The Iranian Revolution. For most of its modern history, Iran had been a country trying to walk a careful line. It had monarchs, it had oil, it had relationships with the West. The last king, the Shah, was modernizing the country at a rapid pace. Women wore Western clothes in public. Universities were full. Hollywood movies played in Tehran. Israelis and Iranians had quiet, working diplomatic relations. It was complicated, but it was not what it became. And then, in a matter of months, a man returned from exile. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini. He was an old cleric with a long beard and burning eyes. He landed in Tehran on a plane from Paris, and he was greeted by millions of people in the streets. The Shah fled, the monarchy collapsed, and a new kind of government was born. An Islamic republic built on a specific theology with a specific enemy in mind. From that moment forward, the rhetoric coming out of Iran shifted in a way that should make every careful reader of the Bible pay attention. Speeches were given calling for the destruction of Israel, banners were unfurled, flags were burned, missiles were paraded through the streets with slogans painted on the sides. The official position of the government became, openly and without apology, that the Jewish state must not exist. This is a very recent development, not ancient, not medieval, recent. In less than 50 years, the country we knew as a partner has become the country we know as a threat. And the timing of it should make any honest person stop and think, because something else was happening at the exact same time. Something on the other side of the region, something that prophecy had pointed to for thousands of years. Israel had come back. In 1948, after almost 2,000 years of being scattered across the earth, the Jewish people returned to their ancient homeland and re-established a nation. The Bible had said it would happen. Generation after generation had read those passages and wondered how it could ever come true. And then, in the lifetime of people who are still alive today, it came true. And the moment Israel returned to the map, the spiritual climate of the entire region began to shift. Old nations stirred. Old hatreds woke up. And in the land once called Persia, a new identity began to form. An identity built around a single burning idea. Erase what God has restored. That is the spirit Ezekiel saw coming. And the alliance he described is forming right now. There is a passage in the Bible that for most of history made almost no sense. For 2,000 years, scholars read it, pastors preached it, commentators tried to explain it, but the picture it painted seemed so distant, so unlikely, so disconnected from the political reality of the world that most people simply filed it away as one of those passages we would understand someday. We are living in that someday. The passage is in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, chapter 39, two chapters that describe a future war. Not an ancient war, a future war. A war that had not yet happened when Ezekiel wrote it down. A war that, according to the passage itself, would happen in what the Bible calls the latter years, the end of an age. Ezekiel describes a coalition, not a single nation. A group of nations joining together, moving against the land of Israel after Israel has been regathered from the nations and is living in apparent peace. And he names them. He names the leader of this coalition, a figure called Gog, from a land called Magog. Most scholars place this region somewhere in what is today the area north of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, Russia and the surrounding regions. He names other allies, Meshech and Tubal, ancient names that point to regions in modern Turkey. He names Gomer and Beth Togarmah, more regions in the same general area. He names Cush, ancient Sudan and Ethiopia. He names Put, ancient Libya. And right in the middle of that list, with no explanation, no hesitation, he names one more, Persia, Iran. Stop and look at that coalition for a moment. Russia, Turkey, Sudan, Libya, Iran. Take a globe and trace those countries with your finger. Then turn on the news and ask yourself honestly, when in the last 2,000 years has there been a moment when those specific nations were aligned in a way that even resembles what Ezekiel described? The answer is never, until now. For most of history, these nations had no relationship with each other. They had different empires, different religions, different goals. Russia was a Christian empire. Turkey was the heart of the Ottoman Caliphate, often at war with Russia. Iran was at the edge, doing its own thing. Sudan and Libya were colonial outposts. The idea that they would all stand on the same side of a conflict was, frankly, absurd. And then Israel came back, and piece by piece, year by year, the alignment began to form. Russia and Iran began cooperating openly in the early 2000s. Military deals, nuclear technology, diplomatic protection at the United Nations. Turkey's relationship with Israel cooled, then froze, then turned hostile in the public rhetoric of its leaders. Sudan, for decades, was a base for groups openly committed to the destruction of Israel. Libya, after its own collapse, became a corridor for weapons and influence flowing in the same direction. And today, when Iran is mentioned in the news, who is standing behind it? Who is providing the weapons? Who is providing the diplomatic cover? Who is buying the oil and funding the regime? The same names. Now, I am not standing here telling you that next Tuesday the war of Ezekiel 38 is going to happen. I am not setting a date. The Bible itself warns against setting dates. What I'm telling you is something much simpler and in some ways much more sobering. For the first time in human history, the exact coalition described by a Jewish prophet 2,600 years ago actually exists. The pieces are on the board. The map looks the way the map needs to look. The leaders are speaking the way Ezekiel said they would speak, and the target, a regathered Israel in its ancient land, exists for the first time in 2,000 years. And right in the center of that coalition, the Bible places Iran, not as a side character, not as a footnote, as one of the named nations that comes against Israel in the final movement of the age. If you are still here with me, watching this, I want to invite you to do something. Subscribe to this channel and walk with us every day as we open these passages and follow these threads together. There is so much in the Bible that we were never taught, so many connections that have been hidden in plain sight, and the days we are living in are not the kind of days you want to walk through alone. So, hit that subscribe button, stay with us, and let's keep going. Because what Ezekiel saw next is something almost no one talks about. He saw the outcome. He saw what happens when this coalition moves. He saw what happens to Iran. He saw what happens to the armies that gather against the mountains of Israel. And he saw something that should change the way every honest person thinks about the headlines of our time. Because in Ezekiel's vision, the war does not end the way the world expects. When the coalition moves, Ezekiel says something strange happens. The armies gather. The forces close in. From the north, from the east, from the south, they come down toward the mountains of Israel. The numbers are overwhelming. The strategy seems flawless. From any human point of view, the outcome looks decided before the first shot is fired, and then the sky breaks open. Ezekiel describes it in language that has confused readers for centuries. He talks about a great shaking, a trembling that runs through the land of Israel and beyond. He talks about confusion falling on the armies so that they turn their weapons against each other. He talks about fire from heaven, rain and hail of a kind never seen before, plague, earthquake, sword. It is not Israel that defeats this coalition, not according to Ezekiel. It is God himself. That is the part of the prophecy that the modern mind struggles with the most. Because we have been trained to think of wars in terms of weapon systems and intelligence, reports and supply chains. We think of victory as a product of strategy. We think of nations as the deciders of their own fate. But Ezekiel is showing us something older, something deeper. He is showing us that there are moments in history when the curtain pulls back and the one who has been writing the story all along steps onto the stage, and in that moment, no army stands. The text is very clear about what happens to the coalition. The bodies fall, the weapons are gathered, the mourning lasts for months, the cleanup lasts for years. And when it is over, the nations of the world look at what just happened, and they see something they cannot explain by any natural cause. Then Ezekiel writes the line that I want you to carry with you. He says, "The nations will know that I am the Lord." That is the purpose of the whole thing. Not destruction for the sake of destruction. Not vengeance for the sake of vengeance. The purpose is revelation. The purpose is that a world that has spent generations forgetting the God of Israel will suddenly, in one moment, remember that he is real. Now here is the part that should break us open a little. Inside that coalition, the Bible places Iran, the land once called Persia, the land that 3,000 years ago opened the door for the Jewish people to come home, the land that funded the rebuilding of the temple, the land that produced Esther's husband and Daniel's masters and Cyrus the shepherd, the same land. How does a nation that once stood as an instrument of restoration end up on the wrong side of the final story? That is not just a question about Iran. That is a question about every nation, every people, every soul. Because the Bible does not flatter anyone. It does not say America will always be on the right side. It does not say Brazil. It does not say Europe. It does not say anywhere. It tells us that nations rise and fall, that hearts harden and soften, and that what matters in the end is not the passport you carry, but the posture of your heart before the one who made you. And there is something else in Ezekiel that almost nobody talks about. Even after the coalition falls, even after the judgment lands, the story does not end in punishment. It ends in mercy, because in the chapters that follow, Ezekiel describes something that has not yet happened in human history. He describes a new temple, a river flowing from it, land healed, people restored, a kingdom that does not end. The same prophet who saw the war saw the peace that comes after, and that peace was never meant to be only for one people. The Bible makes that clear from beginning to end. The God of Israel is the God of the nations. The blessing promised to Abraham was a blessing meant to reach every family on the face of the earth, including yours, including the family of every Iranian listening to this video right now in their own quiet way, behind closed doors, with a Bible they were not supposed to have. Because here is something the headlines almost never tell you. Inside Iran, in spite of everything, one of the fastest growing movements toward Jesus in the entire world is happening right now. Quietly, underground, house to house. People raised on slogans against Israel are reading the Hebrew prophets in secret and discovering the Messiah they were never told about. The same Messiah their ancient ancestors helped, in a strange and indirect way, to bring into the world. There is a side of Iran the news will not show you. A side of the story Ezekiel hinted at in the smallest brushstrokes. A side that says, even now, even in the country named in the coalition, God has not stopped reaching. Which means the Bible is not only telling us about a war, it is telling us about a love that refuses to give up on anyone, even the nation the world is most afraid of. And that should change the way you watch every single headline that comes out of that part of the world from this day forward. So where does that leave us? You and I sitting on opposite sides of a screen in a world that feels like it is shaking more every year, watching a country half a planet away, wondering what it all means, wondering if any of it touches our own quiet lives, our own kitchens, our own children sleeping down the hall. I want to be careful here, because there is a kind of teaching that takes prophecy and turns it into entertainment. That treats the Bible like a puzzle box, where the goal is just to be the smartest one in the room about what comes next. That is not what we are doing. That's not what any of this is for. The reason the Bible tells us about Iran is not so that we can post about it on the internet. It is not so that we can argue with strangers in the comments. It is not so that we can feel superior to our neighbors who do not see what we see. The reason the Bible tells us about Iran is so that we understand the moment we are in, so that we live with our eyes open, so that we hold our lives a little more loosely and our faith a little more tightly. There's a verse that, when I read it slowly, changes everything about how I see the news. The prophet Daniel, after all the visions, after all the kings, after all the rising and falling of empires, writes this. He says, the wise will understand, and those who turn many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever and ever. The wise will understand. Not the loud, not the angry, not the people with the biggest platforms or the sharpest opinions. The wise, the ones who took the time to read, the ones who slowed down, the ones who looked at the map and looked at the book and asked honest questions and waited for honest answers. That is what we are doing right now, you and me, in this small moment, together. And if you have made it this far, I want you to consider something. Maybe it is not an accident that you ended up watching this video. Maybe you were scrolling through dozens of other things, and something in you paused on this one. Maybe there is a part of you that has been quietly asking questions for a long time. Questions about God, about the future, about whether any of this is really real, about whether your own life has a place in a story bigger than the four walls around you. If that is you, then hear me clearly. The same God who named Cyrus 150 years before he was born knows your name. The same God who saw Esther in a foreign palace and used her to save a people sees you. The same God who walked with Daniel through the lion's den and gave him visions in the quiet hours of the night is not far from anyone here. The story the Bible is telling about Iran, about Israel, about the nations is real. But underneath that bigger story is a smaller, quieter one. The story of one human heart finding its way home. That story is the one he cares about most. That story is the reason he wrote any of this down in the first place. The headlines will keep coming, the wars will keep flaring, the maps will keep shifting, but there is a peace that does not depend on any of that. There is a kind of grounding that the news cannot give you and cannot take away. It is found in the same place every honest seeker has ever found it, in the simple decision to stop running, to turn around, to open the book, to listen. Before we close, I want to ask you for two things. First, share this video with 5 people, not because I need the views, but because you and I both know there are people in your life who are quietly asking these same questions, people who are tired of the noise, people who would never sit through a sermon, but who might watch a video like this one in the quiet of their own room. Send it to them. You may never know what it opens up in them, but God will. Second, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me what hit you. Tell me what you are wrestling with, and tell me what you want me to talk about next, because we are walking through these things together, and the next videos on this channel are shaped by what you, on the other side of the screen, are actually asking. Your voice matters here. And one more thing, if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what is coming on this channel is going to be deeper than what you have seen so far. There are other nations in those same prophecies. There are other names. There are other threads. And we are going to pull on every one of them, slowly and honestly, in the days ahead. Stay with us. The story is not over. There is an old image in the Bible that I want to leave you with. A potter at his wheel, spinning clay between his hands, shaping it, reshaping it, pressing it down when it goes wrong, and starting again. Patient, steady, not in a hurry, working on something only he can see. The prophet Jeremiah watched a potter work one day, and as he watched, he understood something he had been missing. He realized that the same hands shaping that single piece of clay are the hands shaping every nation on the earth, every empire, every flag, every map, including the one we have been talking about all this time. Persia did not rise by accident. It did not fall by accident. It did not return as Iran by accident. It is not standing where it is standing today by accident. There is a hand on the wheel. There has always been a hand on the wheel. And the same hand that shaped Cyrus, that shaped Esther, that shaped Daniel, that shaped every king and every empire that has ever moved across that ancient land is still shaping the story right now. That should comfort us, and it should sober us. It should comfort us because it means the news is not the final word. The generals are not the final word. The treaties are not the final word. The headlines that keep us awake at night are not the final word. There is someone above all of it, someone who has been writing this story since before there were stars in the sky, and he has not lost the pen. But it should also sober us, because if nations are clay, then so are we, every one of us. And the question that every honest soul has to ask eventually is the only question that really matters. Whose hands am I in? Not the hands of a president, not the hands of an algorithm, not the hands of the economy or the headlines or the chaos of the times. Those hands cannot hold you. They will let you go. But there is one set of hands that has never let go of anyone who turned toward them. Not in 3,000 years, not in 3,000 more. That is the offer underneath every prophecy. That is the invitation hidden inside every verse about every nation. The God who shapes the kingdoms of the earth is the same God who knows the number of hairs on your head. He is not too big to care about you. He is not too busy to hear you. He is not far. He has never been far. He is closer than the breath you just took. So when you turn off this video and you go back to whatever the rest of your day looks like, I want one thing to stay with you. Not a date on a calendar, not a prediction, not a flag, a name. The God of Cyrus is the God of you. That is the only headline that ever really mattered. Before you go, do me one last favor. Share this video with 5 people who need to hear this. Not 5 people who already agree with you. 5 people who are quietly searching the way you were searching when you clicked on this. You may really be the only voice they hear this week that points them towards something true. And leave a comment below. Tell me in your own words what you are walking away with, what stayed with you, what you want to understand next. Maybe it is a country, maybe it is a prophet, maybe it is a question you have carried for years and never said out loud. Say it here. We will go there together. Subscribe and walk with us every day, because there is more, so much more. The story is not finished, and neither are you.